Now, immediately, the Sui seems so much like Qin Shi Huangdi. Some interesting differences. Yes, a period of warring states and disunity. One military man comes and unifies. He then creates public works projects that are massively important to future dynasties of China, to the rest of Chinese history. For Qin Shi Huangdi, it was the Great Wall, being joined together and such. For Sui Wendi, the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal connects over 1,000 miles, not just a canal, but also a road alongside it, over 1,000 miles, in less than 15 years, connects the Yellow River up north to the Yangtze River down south. That 1,000-mile canal makes economic unification of the northern plain, the central plain of the Yellow River, and the Yangtze Valley possible for the first time. Now transporting goods from the more fertile south up north, transporting soldiers back and forth, and just trade goods altogether, rice, grain, anything, is now much easier. So that's what Sui Wendi does. He also tries to expand to the Han borders. Again, remember, this is not a dark age. They were reading the whole time. So he knows the Han borders, and so he conquers the Vietnam area and out into the Silk Road, and has a problem conquering Korea. He tries 3 times to conquer Korea, massive armies, great expense on top of the expense of the Grand Canal and all that sort of thing, and his Korean campaigns, one after the other, keep on failing. And because of that, finally, the people overthrow him. But not before he got rid of the mistake of the earlier Jin dynasty that did away with the scholar officials being chosen by merit, and instead being given by family, an aristocratic thing. So the Sui dynasty reinstated the Confucian civil service and implemented exams to identify people to make it harder for you to get in just because your family has money or something. And so this is a very important step. So interestingly, even more, is that Sui is a Buddhist. And yet, politically, this Buddhist emperor understands the value of Confucianism, especially Han synthesis Confucianism. So, very strong advocate of the Confucian scholar official bureaucracy. All right, so in any case, though, within 40 years, his overreach, the Grand Canal, military campaigns, and all that sort of thing, caused people to rise up against him, and the Tang Dynasty is declared. Tang Dynasty's dates are 618, I believe. Yeah. 618 to 907, about our standard 3-year average. And the Tang Dynasty, you notice we're going up and up and up here. And you notice that the Sui and Tang, I don't know if you can see that, probably not. But here is the period of disunity, and here's the Sui right here, and then we go up, here's the Tang. And you notice that we're going to keep going up to the Tang, because the Tang, for the first half of its 300 years, is another high point of Chinese civilization. Dynastic cycle kicks in about 150 years into the Tang, and then it declines, but not before not before the Song Dynasty, which should be way higher. Okay, we won't go into the Song today. We'll stop at the Tang. But in any case, so where are we on the Tang Dynasty then? So the Sui, very short-lived, only 40 years. Let's say 590 to 618, actually only 30 years. Tang Dynasty comes in. It is the high point of Buddhist civilization in China. Buddhism came in through the Silk Road at the end of the Han Dynasty. It appealed to the Chinese, by the way. Why did Buddhism appeal to China? Well, Taoism and Confucianism don't satisfy a couple of things. They don't satisfy women because Confucianism frowns on women, they're second-class citizens, and Taoism just doesn't really have anything to say about that sort of thing. Neither one of them have any hope to offer for those people who need to think that, we have a life after death. Neither one of them give any promises that way. Confucianism, in fact, says we cannot know, and we should not pretend to know. So keep the ancestors happy, but keep them far away. Don't get all into that spirit stuff because it's dangerous. It makes society irrational and crazy. We've got evidence of that in China's history already with the yellow turbans. We'll have more of it later. And we've got evidence of that in other cultures too. Look at the Crusades. Look at America right now with its Muslim hating going on. So the Confucians were aware of that very early on. In any case, and another reason that Buddhism is found fertile soil in China during this time was because the northern barbarians were not Chinese, so they can't read Confucianism. These barbarians, they can't. Confucianism and Taoism are very, very Han Chinese things, and Buddhism, on the other hand, is a universal religion. Anybody can be a Buddhist. You don't have to, you don't have to be Indian. You don't have any special status if you're of a certain race or something like that. So that's about it. What is interesting is the reactions of particularly the Confucians to the Buddhists, because the Buddhists made monasteries, and you could be a monk in this monastery. And to become a monk, you had to give up your name and shave your head and not have sex and leave your family and all of these things. Giving up your name is giving up your father's name, your family name. That is as close to blasphemy, that is as close to sin as you can come in an atheistic philosophy like Buddhism, like Confucianism. The body is cremated in Buddhism, and what does that do to the funeral rituals of the Confucians? On and on. So the Confucians had a lot of problems with Buddhism. Celibacy, not having sex, not having family, not having babies, that is insane to a Confucian, because one of your biggest duties to your ancestors is to have children, to continue honoring them and pleasing them through ancestral offerings and rituals. So to stop the family line is just incredibly blasphemous to Confucians. So that's the Confucian reaction to it. But at the same time, the Confucians, they're not dogmatists. They started reading Buddhism. They were, curious about it and that sort of thing. And so some Buddhist ideas will, over the centuries, start influencing Confucianism. The Taoists are more interesting to me in their reaction to Buddhism, because they recognize in Buddhism, don't desire anything. Buddha says that fear and desire are the two traps that keep us from, that keep us in suffering. And to be released from suffering, all I have to do is overcome our weakness of fearing and desiring things through being attached to things, which are always impermanent and changing. And impermanence and change, that's the yin-yang, the cycle, the constant change of yin and yang, the Tao and Taoism. The fear and desire, that's the Taoist. The Tao is easy if you have no preferences. So the Taoists just said, Buddhism is just a ripoff of Lao Tzu and our Taoist classics. These guys have just taken it, barbarized it, and brought it back. So it's a ripoff. So some funny stuff going on there. But the Taoists will never be trusted again by the political class of China. I shouldn't say never, but they will always be mistrusted because the yellow turbans were Taoist and they brought down the Han Dynasty. And when I say the yellow turbans were Taoist, they were religious Taoist, not the early philosophical Taoist. over the hundreds of years after Lao Tzu and Chuangzi, Taoism started getting into things like immortality and all that sort of thing, afterlives and such. So it became a religion instead of a philosophy. In any case, so that's the Buddhist high point, the Tang Dynasty. The dynasty itself is a high point in Chinese civilization because of its culture. Now, if you think back on wave one, Shang and Zhou, especially the Western Zhou, and then wave two, and now here we are in wave three. In wave one, each one of those left a specific layer, a foundation to Chinese civilization. And the Western Zhou definitely left the Confucianism, the ideology of ritual, of music, of filial piety, of ancestor worship, of benevolence, of the mandate of heaven. All of that Confucius then rescued from oblivion during the Eastern Zhou. So that ideological and philosophical foundation was laid by the Zhou. The second wave, Qin Shi Huangdi and the Han Dynasty, they laid the political, centralized bureaucratic modern government, very efficient, very effective, and Confucian scholar officials in that bureaucracy and at the top of the social pyramid culturally in the Han Dynasty. So those are the layers left by wave one and wave two. Okay, great. We've got a strong culture and we've got a strong political system. But what does any great culture further need? Well, the Tang gives it. Art. We've already seen that before the Tang, the calligraphy, the light-hearted poetry, the escapist poetry, the aesthetic art for art's sake stuff comes out. Well, it gets even more cultured here. Chang'an is the capital city. Okay, it is a capital city that is built to a very rational design, square north-south orientation, symmetrical markets on the east and the west that are government controlled, very, very communistic in that sense. Prices are set, government controls them, regulates the prices, all that sort of thing. Controls the markets. They're only open from 12 to 5 every day, that sort of thing. Inside that capital city, they are very, very open to and tolerant to religions. They're just incredibly civilized. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Persians, Buddhists, Hindus, Daoists, they're all in the capital. They're all allowed in the capital walls. They have their temples and their shrines. So incredibly open, incredibly tolerant. The Tang Dynasty is in Chang'an, right at the entrance to the Silk Road. So the trade and culture from the Central Asian states, the Persians, the Sogdians, so many different, what is today like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Turkestan and so forth, Turkmenistan. So all of the Persians and Indians are all coming in through the Silk Road. So it's very, very world culture. It's New York City. The music is world music, the fashion is world fashion, the sports, the entertainment, everything. The musical instruments, it's all international world influence. The emperors of the Tang. We know that the earliest great emperor is Tang Taizong. He's not the first, but I think he's technically the third, but really the second. He strengthens the examination systems. He militarily expands to the Han borders. Kills a lot of people, including his brothers, to make sure that he gets the throne after and makes his father give up the throne. But once he took it, he was a great emperor, known especially for his support of the Confucian scholar officials and his pledge to never kill a critic for standing up and telling him to his face that he was unwise, that he was making a bad decision. So again, Silk Road is back and so forth. And he's a patron of the arts. My favorite story about Taizong, Wang Shizhi's Orchard Pavilion, the poem about that we talked about in the period of disunity, that calligraphy, this military emperor, this man of war who could cold-bloodedly kill his brothers in order to take the throne, so loved this calligraphy of Wang Shizhi that he sends an official to a monastery where a Buddhist apparently has the original copy of the preface, and will not let it go of it. And Taizong tells his official to, by whatever means necessary, to get this work of art and bring it back. And the official does. He steals it from the Buddhist, brings it back, and Taizong has himself buried with it. It's his most prized possession. Kind of cool. We also see the first and only female emperor. Empress is really wrong because she declares herself Emperor Wu. We'll only note she's significant, A, because she is the only woman to be an emperor. B, she actually, yes, she purged and killed a lot of powerful, wealthy families, landowning families, and also a lot of Confucians, because all of them were against her. But she actually ruled pretty well. But she did so by taking Buddhism as her sort of support base, and this was very bad PR for Buddhism. She declared herself an incarnation of the Buddha, the Maitreya Buddha, and so despite the fact that she held on to power for decades and only gave it up when she was in her 80s and ruled pretty ruthlessly, this former concubine, when she was dead and gone, this was ammunition to use against the Buddhists. Now, after she died, the Tang reaches its peak almost literally halfway through the Tang Dynasty with Emperor Xuanzong. Again, the Tang Dynasty starts in 609. Xuanzong is therefore almost 150 years exactly later. But notice he rules for 40 years. His court was beautiful. If you know anything about European history, when you think of Xuanzong, think of the Italian Renaissance, maybe, Florence, or think of Elizabethan England, although of course this is 700 years earlier. Because he surrounded himself with a court of incredible artists, and it's one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the history of the planet. It's a time of a golden age of landscape painting. Calligraphy only flourishes more and more. Sculpture, porcelain start growing. Of course, this is a period of Buddhism, so you've got pagodas and temples, Buddhist architecture. He also hired poets. The lyric poetry of the Tang Dynasty is China's most famous age of poetry. Queen Elizabeth had her Shakespeare in England. Xuanzong had his Li Bai or Li Po, his Doufu, and others. An anthology from the Tang Dynasty we still read today has over 40,000 poems in it. In fact, I think the number is closer to 50,000 poems surviving from the Tang Dynasty. I'm not sure that before the Renaissance we have 50,000 poems in the entire history of the West. And this is just from a 300-year dynasty in China. Well, the Tang Dynasty and the reign of Xuanzong have a tragic turn during this period of court splendor, of prosperity, of elegance, of grace, of beauty. Because the old emperor, he's been ruling for over 40 years now, he's up there in years, and he meets a lovely young concubine, Yang Guifei, and she has a pet general, a barbarian up north in control of the frontier along the Great Wall, and she has the emperor's heart, and so he will do anything to make her happy, including bestow favors on her pet general up north. And her pet general's name is Lushan. Xuanzong gives him tens of thousands of troops in his garrison, which Lushan proceeds to use to invade the capital. as the capital is being evacuated and soon burned, Xuanzang and Yang Guifei leave with their bodyguards, crushed, mortified, and the bodyguards, in a classic scene of poetry and painting and everything, drama, the bodyguards demand Yang Guifei and her family be killed for causing the fall of the capital and this disaster for the empire. And Xuanzang, who loves her, has to let them do that. He then gives the throne to his son, to an heir, and goes from being the Tang's greatest, most sophisticated emperor to its biggest disaster, all over love of beauty of this woman. After that, because it took a lot of alliances with powerful families and generals to defeat An Lushan, the Tang had to compromise with them and basically make military governors instead of scholar officials govern the empire. And so you've got a semi-warlord status. Dynastic decline sets in. When you've got warlords, that means the capital doesn't have control anymore in the center. That means that taxes and revenues are harder to collect. That's one reason that the anti-Buddhist campaigns after the An Lushan rebellion, again, picture An Lushan being smack dab halfway into the 300 years of the Tang Dynasty. So the anti-Buddhist campaigns, 845, that's the government taking action against the Buddhist monasteries, because look at this, there are 4,000 monasteries in China, none of them are paying taxes. They're working as banks, giving loans, all sorts of stuff. So they are a drain on the economy. They closed 40,000 temples, 250,000 monks and nuns living in these monasteries, not paying taxes, not doing any work, not growing food, not making silk. They're just praying and basically running private businesses for the Buddhist religion. So they're forced back to secular life. And one of the great moments of Confucian protest against unwise emperors comes when Han Yu, after the An Lushan rebellion, an emperor is about to allow a relic of the Buddha, in other words, a bone, supposedly they claim, of the Buddha, come into the palace where the emperor was going to give it his blessing in a ritual, in a ceremony, before it was taken to a Buddhist temple. And Han Yu wrote a complaint to the emperor in which he decried the emperor for being able to take this talk about afterlives and reincarnation and all of this unknowable stuff seriously, and set a bad example for the people, because if the emperor starts taking irrational things seriously, then of course the people will be encouraged to also. So Han Yu writes a very, very powerful and dangerous letter to the emperor publicly, which includes a line: how can an intelligence as high as His Majesty's take such a religion seriously? He's just outraged. He begs him not to honor a dead man's bone, and that's how he puts it. The emperor instead takes offense at that and exiles Han Yu, and he dies in exile. But he went down in Chinese history as a great defender of Confucianism. Well, the last 50 years of the Tang Dynasty are dynastic decline. The government isn't controlling, so you've got hunger, you've got bad administration, all that sort of thing. It's like the end of the Han Dynasty. Banditry, uprisings, and all that. And in around 900, almost 300 years after the Tang Dynasty starts, the Tang falls. So I'll stop there. We'll do the song in a follow-up.